Welcome, everyone. So, I thought I'd answer the question that I used to hear a lot about something like a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago. And it's probably still around these days, but it's kind of a fun thing to answer. That question is, why don't psychics win the lottery? And so I have two responses that I will share with you in response to this question. My first response to this question is, how do you know that they haven't? So this question has long been around as a way of kind of mocking people who think that they're psychic or mocking the notion of psychic abilities overall, because the thought would be if somebody was psychic, they would win the lottery. But here are things that we also know. Money tends to bring out the worst in people. It tends to really show character. And I'm saying this as part of my response because the best advice to be given of if you win or inherit any sum of money is to shut your mouth regarding it. Because otherwise, all sorts of people can come out of the woodwork. There might even be, harassment. People have received threats. Sometimes there have even been things like murders and murder plots for people who actually have won sums of money. And, all of that I'm bringing up for a good reason, that somebody who wins money or inherits a sum of money, psychic or not, probably would be best served by not sharing that with the people around them. The reason that my response is like this for psychics in particular, why don't psychics win the lottery, is that we have this sort of archetype of what a psychic is. And it is somebody who is loudly proclaiming that they are psychic. And so part of our scorn that is a part of that question is being like, if somebody won the lottery and they were psychic, that they would want to tell everybody that they won because, in fact, they are psychic. And that isn't true of much of human nature overall. There are plenty of people who would be considered sensitive, intuitive, or even psychic out there who put those skills to personal use, maybe who've even won the lottery, um, who are not going to tell a darn person that the reason why they that they won the lottery or gambled right or put a right bet in or placed something on the stock market and benefited from it was because they're a psychic. The most we tend to get from people is the thought like, oh, I just had a feeling. That is societally acceptable. Oh, I just had a feeling. I just had an intuition. I should buy the ticket. We kind of halfway allow that in our society. But this notion that somebody is going to loudly proclaim their psychic capacities when they are winning or earning any type of money is not accurate. There is a thought of, if people are loudly proclaiming that they are smart, that they are strong, that they are psychic, that there's likely some type of insecurity there or some type of ego need there. There's something about their personality or identity that needs that title. And this can be a case purely of a wounded person needing that for self-esteem purposes, or it might be an ego purpose that is quite simple, such as somebody who is psychic who sets up a shop looking to assist others through their intuition or their psychic capacities. I talk about in my other work that ego is not this bad, horrible thing. It is simply our identity. We should have a healthy, flexible ego. We should have a sense of self. Um, totally different video though. So I will say that there are all sorts of people who do things through intuition and psychic capacities, anything from gamble to play the lottery to um, do bets to be a part of the stock market, um, that come from some type of intuition or psychic senses. I will say that part of my first part of this response is also talking about how we have these archetypes that are not necessarily accurate. And the two archetypes I'm going to talk about here are the psychic archetype, which we pin as this person that is totally at odds with reality, that may not be mentally healthy, that is illogical. And then we have the archetype of the businessman, this buttoned down, completely pragmatic, logical, denying anything mystical, magical, psychically oriented, basically only believing in scientific materialism. As we look at those archetypes, they do play out in our reality. We certainly have people who fit those molds. When something is trite or when something is an archetype out there, there's a reason for that. And it's because plenty of people kind of fit under that saying, fit under that persona, fit under that sort of identity label. However, when we split things like this, like saying somebody is purely left brain or purely right brain, what we are leaving out are the countless people who make their livings, who are entrepreneurs, who are business people, who are doctors, scientists, um, people who do all sorts of studies, start all sorts of businesses, have all sorts of ideas and thoughts that come to them randomly, supposedly, or in dreams. The amount of chefs I've worked with who have dreamt of a recipe that they then create in real life. This happens to me as a painter, is that sometimes I will paint or envision something that has come to me in a dream or a vision. And I'm sharing this because when we are talking about the question of why don't psychics win the lottery, the answer is that there are people utilizing their intuition, utilizing their psychic capacities every day in their businesses to make trades on the stock market, to decide whether to invest or not, to decide whether to invent something, to decide what sort of course of action to attend to as a detective, as a doctor, as a scientist. And so the first response to why don't psychics win the lottery is that they do every day. It might be the lottery, as in some big amount. It might also be following intuition at the right time, in the right place, in order to make a living, or otherwise to make an impact on this world. And as I transition to the second response to this, I will say that we have such conditioned biases against feeling, against intuition, against the body. Um, but I always like to bring in the quote, one of my favorites from Arthur C. Clarke, which is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. There are all sorts of people out there that I work with that are in technical fields, that are scientists, that we would think of as these really left brain logical people who end up having psychic abilities, who end up having spiritual awakenings. And those experiences can actually be a bit more difficult for them because they are so pragmatic. But we are intended to have access to both halves of our brain, both halves of our being. Our intuition is intended to be able to rise up and to be met by logic. I've certainly met plenty of smart, intuitive, psychically leaning people who, for example, got really wrapped up in themselves, and started winning or earning a lot of money in the stock market. And then, they get too hyped up in the moment and then they lose all of it. Was this led by intuition in part? Yes. Did that intuition sort of overtake them and get them to kind of a manic state in which they were no longer practicing discernment? One of the first skills that I suggest and that I offer in my shamanic workbook. One, yes, that entirely happens as well. Our intuition is made to be paired with logic. I always teach my students that no matter how psychic you are, no matter how right on you are, to only believe yourself 97%, because that 3% leaves room for sanity. It leaves room for understandable doubt. So let me get to my second response of why don't psychics win the lottery? And this has to do with the nature of psychic abilities. There's the thought that if we are really in tune with psychic capacities, that we would have control over them, that we'd sort of be able to aim them. And I would say for some people that is fairly accurate. But a more accurate depiction is more something like throwing a dart at a dartboard. Even if you're quite good at throwing darts, sometimes you're going to hit bullseye and sometimes you're going to, not even hit the dartboard. And so, why am I mentioning this? Because anybody who has psychic capacities know that our intuitions can be fairly random and hard to act upon. For example, let's say somebody has precognitive abilities. They have dreams and visions of the future. Let's say that they're even naturally, natural disaster oriented. And so let's say that this guy has a vision or a dream about an earthquake happening somewhere in South America. So even if the exact date or year comes through, which it likely isn't going to, there's the question of who is he supposed to call? Who would take that number? Like who would take his call? What would they actually do about it, even if he was 100% correct? Then we get to an even more difficult reality about psychic capacities is like, let's say this same man has a vision of a natural disaster, an earthquake in South America, but all he got from it was that it was somewhere in South America. That's a big place. It also may have been a vision from the past, may have been a vision from the future, from the present. Maybe he's dreaming exactly at the time that that earthquake is taking place. Maybe somebody is sending him that vision. Maybe he has somebody who is communicating with him that died in an earthquake in South America at some point. And so, somebody who has psychic capacities, and this is just one example, needs to practice an incredible amount of discernment, and may not get all of the clues to sort of be able to hit that bullseye or put all the puzzle pieces together. And this is probably, beyond my glib first answer of like, there are plenty of people psychics who do win the lottery, so to speak. Um, is that somebody can be incredibly massively intuitive. Somebody may have a fount of divine knowledge coming through them. And the real answer is that can that knowledge come up and be worked with by the logical aspects of the mind? Uh, can that sort of intuition be sort of corralled to find that bullseye? Basically to be made sense of in some way. For many people who are psychic or sensitive, that answer is no. Even if they do get some clues, like the example I gave of the precognitive dreamer or person who has visions, um, even if somebody is dreaming or has sense of something like a crime or a murder or something like that, if somebody is truly pragmatic, they have the logical aspect of their brain engaged as well, they're going to need to go through a process where they sit with information, they decide how resonant it is, how real it is, because we can get all sorts of intuitions that come from a wounded place within us that are inaccurate, that are not so correct, along with even if somebody is an incredible psychic, an incredible intuitive, along with things that are quite correct, that hit that bullseye, that give name, date, time, place, all of that information, uh, is that more often than not, the intuitive aspects of self are not constrained to the same sort of linear time that our logical mind sort of creates and corrals us into. And so any sort of visions, intuitions, dreams that we may have, the sort of flow that a psychic experiences may not be something that can be put into words. It may not be something that is totally pragmatic. And even for people that do have incredible psychic capacities, that have the capacity to do things like remote viewing, that have the capacity to do things like to see aspects of crimes, especially if they're, holding on to an object of the person who is missing or presumed deceased. And so even if somebody does have that capacity to practice psychometry, does have that capacity to go somewhere and get strong intuitive readings from other people, from crime scenes, from homes, from all sorts of places, there is a process of discernment that needs to happen because not all information we receive is valid. There also is a process of sorting through information because just like everything we read in a day online isn't valid, isn't helpful, all of the intuitive information that we receive a day in the day requires a similar sorting process or should have one. And also when we add on to this that the aspects of ourself that connect to spirit are often not time oriented. And while there can be clues to time, place, date, things like that, some visions, intuitions, experiences that we may have psychically, dreams, all of that sort of stuff. Even if we are the most fabulous remote viewer ever, we can look in on a place from a place far away. There is a question of if that person is remote viewing in the present moment, at the current place in sort of the timeline, if they are looking at the future, if they're looking at the past, if they're in fact looking at another plane of reality, things get incredibly confusing. But if we bring it back to simplicity, like I always like to do, the question of why don't psychics win the lottery is meant to discredit and sort of scoff at people who call themselves psychics. And we've created this whole archetype of the psychic of being something that is anti-reality, anti-science, logic, all of those sorts of things. And that archetype sometimes pans out, but there are so many of us that just simply have the capacity to have aspects to both sides of our being, to have access and to not cut ourselves off from things just because they go beyond sort of scientific materialism. And so there are plenty of people out there who embrace both. There are also plenty of people who don't recognize that they're embracing both, and the real reason that they made a specific decision in their career, in their life, was because of intuition, was because of a psychic sense. Um, I will end talking a little bit about reality because I think that this is interesting as well. Is that we, many of you may remember from basic science courses, the observer effect. Basically, when we observe things, that we change the outcome of them. What we know to be reality, what we count on thinking that we can control, what we think is commonly agreed upon, isn't. Police detectives know this very well because if you have five people who are witnessing a crime, all five of them may describe the suspect differently. And this is because we do not see reality as it is. We see reality through a series of biases, through a series of what we've been conditioned to believe reality is like, through the lens of trauma, through the lens of circumstance, through a sort of bubble for some of us of privilege or of not encountering people and ideas outside of the bubble of people that we've surrounded ourselves by. Most of us operate in a bubble in which where we only wish to hear thoughts come through to us that are what we are already thinking. It is, in fact, a rare person who is willing to break free from that because it threatens the ego. And so most of us are living lives in which we are repeating patterns from our childhood, repeating conditioning from our childhood, living in a sea of fear and hatred and biases that we have not yet questioned. And that is how we see reality. And that is how we create things in part like the observer effect, but also how five people can witness a crime and describe the suspect incredibly differently. And so I like to leave on that note because people always like to go into this false dichotomy of um, left brain, true, logical, right brain, feeling oriented, uh, inaccurate, illogical, immature, and that is not accurate whatsoever. Not only do these two sides of our brains interact with one another to construct our reality on just a very basic level, but also this false separation is simply our conditioning yet again. It is attempting to break ourselves in two. And this idea that all of us agree upon and see reality as it is not accurate whatsoever. It in fact takes people a long period of time during spiritual awakening. If you watch my chakra videos, pretty much all the way up to the chakra, so awakening first through sixth chakra. And the opening of this chakra is the ability to see reality as it is until somebody gets to that point, which is a very incredibly minute portion of the population, is that we can't even agree upon what we consider materialist or logical reality. It's funny, I will end with kind of an anecdote, which saying that like, as a semi-public facing person these days, um, that sometimes I will say something that I try to make completely clear in an interview or in one of my books or in a blog or something like that. And somebody will read it and, either not process it or take the exact opposite sort of meaning from it. And for a while, I sat with this. This was quite a while ago because and when I was able to sit with this more and more, I realized that people have such a vested interest in seeing reality, the reality that they need to see, seeing it through the emotions that they experience. Somebody who is drowning in bitterness and hatred is going to see the world through the eyes of bitterness and hatred. Somebody who is suffering immensely is going to see through the eyes of suffering. Somebody who is ignorant, who isn't conscious, is going to see through the eyes of that consciousness. And so when somebody does awaken, when somebody does become more conscious, it is not that the world is filled with people that are full of like beams of light, but there can be a growing acceptance, a growing light, a growing understanding that people are who they are. The world is as it is, and a letting go of the desire to control things, to make things up, to appease our egos, and a working through all of that conditioning and biases to be able to see reality naked, so to speak. So I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I always thought it was such a funny question, and it came up for me the other day, and so I thought I'd respond to it. Tell me what you think below.